and then you do it again, there's a certain geschmack in it. Also, the oilam is a little bit more equipped. That's Hashem. I'm going to go over something that we spoke about. And like I always say, with some hoisafis, as Hashem, the sugya of wiping out a cup that has droplets and whatnot, we spoke about it in the sugya, but now the oilam is much more equipped with a lot of the svaras that are thrown around here in the sugya. Now, before I go into that sugya, I want to mention a few nakudas over here. Nakuda number one is that we got to turn on the air conditioning because it's very hot. Okay, that's Nakuda number one. Nakuda number two is that Rabbi Greenhouse, you also have to turn on your air conditioning. It's very hot in here. Akapanim. Nakuda number three is Rabbi Slansky mentioned to me that there's two cases that really are very negay cases. They're very practical cases. That's good for the oilam to know. One is that sometimes you have a soup which is too hot. You have a bowl of soup which is too hot, and that's very normal to put inside of it an ice cube. Now, mitzad the shaila of an ice cube of noilad, it looks like we'll be learning a little bit about noilad because the sukkahs over here, even though we learned noilad already in Shin Chaf, it could be we'll do somewhat of a chazara because the two major sukkahs of noilad in Hilchos Shabbos are found in Siman Shin Chaf, which we did back 293 shirim ago, and the other major sukkah of noilad is over here. So maybe we'll at least chazer a little bit. But akapanim klape the noilad shaila, that seems to be mefurish. That if you take an ice cube and you put it into a cup, even if the cup is hot, so then it melts and it becomes a taroivis. The melting becomes a taroivis. It melts on its own. And mitzad the noilad shaila, there's going to be a makam to be makel. So just mitzad the noilad, assume that won't be the issue. It has to do with the fact that when it's being noilad into a taroivis and it's happening memela, so then we're not going to have the chumras of noilad, whatever those chumras are. So assume mitzad the noilad child is not an issue, but the child is mitzad bishul. Is there going to be a problem mitzad bishul that I have an item that is ice cold and I'm putting it into soup? So as you realize already, ice is water, and therefore there's obviously no problem to take ice and put it into a klisheni. And by the time the soup got to your bowl, it's either a klisheni or a klishlishi, if you're going to consider the ladle to be a klishlishi. So therefore, there's no problem in taking the ice and putting it inside your soup. That's for sure not an issue. It's a good thing to remember for the rest of your life, right? You know, you have boiling hot soup for a child, for this, for that. Maybe your wife is an underage minor or something like that, and you want to take ice and put it inside a bowl of soup. So then the halacha is that that's a good thing to know for the rest of your life, that's mutter. But it was pointed out to me that there's another case that people could potentially do, is that they could take ice and put it into a cholent bowl, right? To me, it's a murderous disaster what you're doing to the cholent, but I guess for a child, I suppose for a child that maybe that could be considered something that people would actually do, a baby or something like that. You know, a yeshivish baby that eats cholent, so they want to put it in, you know, a piece of ice inside it. Now that could be a much more serious child. If you're dealing with a cholent, which is a liquidy cholent, so then it's the same issue. That wouldn't be a problem. It's already a klisheni, and klisheni it's mutter to put ice, and it would be mutter to put water. But if you're dealing with a cholent, which is a much more meaty cholent, I don't know, much more, I don't mean meat fleishiks, I mean foody cholent, and it's something that we spoke might have a din of a davar gush, beans, potato lach, or, you know, whatever else you people have in your cholent, teach their own, right? And upon him, that could definitely be a much more serious shaila. I mean, that's a davar gushy. Thank you, Rabbi Rosenberg. That's a much more gushy cholent. That certainly could be a problem. You're taking ice and you're melting it into a davar gush. That l'chayr is for sure a problem. The each and every drop of water that gets melted immediately gets cooked up by the davar gush. Ani mamin b'emunah shleima in a davar gush, and we certainly are machmir l'chatchila in a davar gush. So that would be forbidden. That would certainly be forbidden. Avesensky is asking, is there a limit for the veld? I'm not sure if you need a limit for the veld because I'm not sure if this is such a common case. You know, it has to be a specific type of a cholent, dafka gushy dika cholent, and dafka that people are putting ice in the cholent. It's not like this widespread minig that people are doing, and it could be the people are doing it, they just don't know from davar gush. If somebody asks me what's a limitz, I'll tell them limitz. The davar gush is a chumrah. So the mishabrus make machmir on davar gush. Do we have to put up signs about something that is considered a chumrah of the mishnah? I'm not sure if you have to put up a sign about something that the Mishabur himself is masking that it's only a chumrah of davar gush, but it's a chumrah that the price can bring down. So therefore, a person certainly would lechatchila have to be machmer in such a thing. That's number one. Number two is that lemashal, if you have like this, I'm saying if the result is less than Yatzaledis by, I'm being asked here from Rabbi Ratchkin, if the result is going to be less than Yatzaledis by, so that you'd have to clarify. First of all, it's going to be a very hard thing to figure out. Number one, if it's going to be less than Yatzaledis by, because it takes a tremendous amount of time. I mean, it's melting the ice. That drop already, because the first drop, the Mishabura told us that when you're doing it, you have to do it with a shvicha echas. You have to pour in the water or right away, all the cold water, so that it shouldn't get cooked. Kama kama bottle. That was the Mishabura over here, I think in Sivkot and Pei Gimel. And so here, you're certainly not doing it quickly. The ice melts, a drop melts, and then another drop melts, and then another drop melts. So certainly that's going to take time for each guy. So you have to be machmer on such a thing. I'm being asked if a child is screaming, is there a market to be made? The child is screaming. So you take it, you put it in the fridge, you put it in the freezer for 1 minute or something like that. And I don't know why you should have to be machmer. Why should you have to be makel on the shaila of a davar gush, which the Mishabura brings down? It's a chumrah of the Mishabura. So I don't see why a person should be makel on such a thing. That's number one. Number two is that I was looking around at some of the drinks. It's very interesting. I was looking around at like these spring drinks and all these drinks and whatever. And I was trying to see, can I take those drinks? We spoke yesterday that it's a big shaila about taking a non-cooked liquid and putting it inside a klisheni. In other words, water for sure is mutter, oil is for sure mutter. And now the shaila is what about, and pasteurized milk is for sure mutter. Or any cooked liquid is mutter. The shaila we had is what about a non-cooked liquid? So I started looking around. Maisa, all these like petalach and things like this petals are previously cooked. That's exactly what petal is. Petal is a concentrate of something that was really cooked out, and the liquid was all cooked out, and that's why you add the liquid. So petal would be mutter to put inside. That's a good idea. For the rest of your life, you don't have to make tea scents. You could just buy petal, and you could put it into, I think in America it's called asis, I think, and you put it just into the what's it called? They put it into the klisheni, and that's mutter. Okay, so that means maybe there's a makom to be machmer, but akapanim, it's certainly mutter to put inside a klisheni. The Maisa, I tried to look into these other liquids, and I'm a little bit mitzupik. Like these spring drinks over there. Rabbi Platzker, you have one over there. What do you find on the back over there? You see anything over there? I looked around on the bottle, and I called the special number over there that you see. That seems to be that they are overloaded with phone calls because they didn't answer my phone call. But I think also that it is, I happen to think that it is from what I see over here, I think it's definitely somewhat pasteurized. I think it's also a suffix. It's at least a suffix if these things are cooked. And once you're getting involved in that, so then you have to realize the whole thing is a big chumrah. Number one is maybe liquids don't cook in a klisheni. Number two, maybe nothing cooks in a klisheni. Number three is maybe it's pasteurized. And you put all that together, so then there is definitely a makom to be makel to put it inside a klisheni. Now, I'm worried what Rabbi Lieberman is saying. Rabbi Lieberman points out that there's probably another 100 ingredients over here inside the spring, and I am a little bit nervous that I won't be able to know if the other 100 ingredients are cooked or not. That's why I kept saying pasteurized, because when they do a pasteurization process, they do it afterward. So I'm not 100% sure. It's certainly if you see somebody putting it into a klisheni, you don't have to object. I myself, I'll put it into the klishlishi and I'll pour the water onto it, and then I'll get all the chumras, because pouring from a klisheni, certainly that has a din of a klishlishi, the Pri Megadim says. And second of all, I'll get the milo of Iroi, I'll get the milo of tzviya. So in those things, it's kedai mistama. In practicality, that's probably how you would make it. That's number two. Number three is that it just comes out something that people really don't realize. Sometimes you have, you want to wash nagelwasser or something, and the water is freezing. So now for the rest of your life, you're allowed to go to you take the nagelwasser cup and you pour cold water into the nagelwasser cup. You take from the sink, cold water, you pour it into the nagelwasser cup. You pour it up to like a place around here or something like that, and you're allowed to pour straight from the urn, straight into the nagelwasser cup. It's a gewaldige idea, this, right? Or sometimes you want to wash like a baby or something, nagelwasser. They say, Danny, that it's a schus that the bris should be on time. So I hope you washed the little yingel nagelwasser. So Maisa, what do? You take the cup of water, you fill it up with the cold water, and you're allowed to pour Iroi Klirishin in there as long as the resultant mixture is not going to be a Yatzaledis by. And Rabbi Lieberman's right. The Chai over here, Rabbi Falk himself would agree, because since you're doing it for a baby, you're for sure going to be careful. I don't know if Rabbi Falk would agree about the first case that we spoke about Kapanim. You're certainly going to be careful because you're doing it for a baby and you wouldn't want to burn the little rachanimo. That's a very good thing to know. Also, the other direction, if you go, the other direction is not as common. To take Kli Rishon water and to pour something into it is not as common. That's why it's not that such a, if a person didn't know that halacha, it wouldn't be so schwer. Didn't know that halacha, it's not such a common case. But that's l'chayra. That's a chayra number two. And that's a very negative kazach. Now, lemaisa, just two nakudas before I get into the ikar sugya, what I wanted to get into over here. The one sugya over here is what we learned, which is very important, is that the Mishabura is machmir on iroi from Kli Rishon, even into a liquid. I say the Mishabura because there is a big chiddush over here. I mentioned this. This is the Rishonim, the Rashba, and the Ran. They go not like that. They learn that if you take from your urn and pour from your urn straight onto your tea cents, or for that matter, straight onto your water, straight on, and not like we've been describing, that it's a lot of water, even if it's a tiny amount of water, which is why the whole chumrah of Rav Falk is really is quite a large chumrah. The entire chumrah of Rav Falk is quite a large chumrah, because Rav Falk is being machmir that you can't take water, boiling hot water, and pour it into cold water when there's a lot of cold water, because we're afraid that you're maybe not going to have enough cold water. You're gonna maybe have too little cold water, and it's going to be a resultant mixture of a yatzaledis bite. Now, by the way, even in the worst case scenario that the resultant mixture is going to be a yatzaledis bite, you should know that the Rashba and the Ran and the Taz and Sivkot and Yechas are meikol halacha. They hold that if you take boiling hot water from an irei Kli Rishon, straight from the urn, and pour it onto a little bit of cold water, and the resultant mixture is yatzaledis bite, they're meikol in that case. Why are they meikol in that case? It's not the halacha. We paskin, of course, like the Mishnah Berurah, and Sivkot 9 Ches, and Sivkot Pei Beis, is the Biur Halacha in two places, and Sivkot Yud Aleph and Yud Beis about this, and the Biur Halacha paskins all over the place in Mishnah Berurah, that when you take boiling hot water and from an irei Kli Rishon and pour it onto cold water, it has to be that there's enough cold water that it's going to cool down the hot water. But there are respectable shitas that hold not like that. Now the Mishnah Berurah says, even though what they say is not kol kach muvan, what does he mean? It's not muvan. They explain what they mean. They explain that when water is getting this arev, it doesn't have the koyach to be mevashel. And we explained yesterday that the side of Bishul is not a side that this item is now yad saledis by. Bishul means there was a shinoi in the item. Bishul means that there was an actual shinoi in the item, and the item is now changed. It's a whole different item. So they're saying that when the water's in motion and the cold water got mixed, and by the time the water got into the Kli Sheni, in other words, when you're taking water from an urn and you're pouring it into, when you're taking water from an urn and you're pouring the urn water into a Kli Sheni, even though there's water in there, you have to remember that water now gets immediately mixed and then immediately cooled down by the walls. So there would have been a tzad to say that in motion, it doesn't have the ability to cook. And that's really be'emes what the Rashba says. He says, Mayim b'mayim, Aim is arvin mamish, b'tachatzanim, aim koyach levashal, adarabba, kol shein neuflin. He says the opposite. What happens is when you take boiling hot water and you pour it onto cold water, so he says it's the exact opposite. The water can't mevashal kedei klipa because right away it goes and mixes straight into the water, which is underneath, which is something that you have to keep in mind. Now, that's very important to keep in mind, Rabbi Isai, that there's a sheet of the Rashba, a sheet of the Ran, a sheet of the Taz, all of these shitas that seem to hold that if you take boiling hot water and pour it onto cold water, that's your tea sense, regular water, even though the resulting mixture is going to be a yatzaledis bite, they hold that medina, it is mutter. And this is the reason why the Mishnah Berurah says that b'di'evet, if you did it, b'di'evet, it's mutter, because we're going to be mekel b'di'evet like the Taz and like the Rashba and the Ran. So to go and make a gzeira that Rav Falk made over here is a very, very, very big chumrah, because if you actually did it, at least in that direction, if you're taking cold water and putting it into a Kli Rishon, which is not a common case, because nobody in the world is ever doing that. How many people are taking from the sink and putting it into their soup in a way where they want to cool down the soup? It's a strange case. If you're ever putting cold water into a soup bowl, into a soup pot, so then it means you're going to actually, yes, bemis cook the water. So where do you ever have a case of where someone's putting cold water in a Kli Rishon to the extent that it's going to cool it down? It's a very strange case. The case you will have is the case that I just said, that you can take boiling hot water from an urn and cool down heat up the water, which is in a cup. And on that case, we're saying it's mutter as long as the result is going to be under Yatzel Edespite. I don't think you have to worry about making a Gzeira, because even in the worst case scenario that he was over, who's he over? According to the Rashba, it's okay. According to the Rani, it's okay. According to the Taz, okay. Now, no one should do this. No one should do this. But certainly we don't have to make a Gzeira when somebody is, or an Eitzah. Certainly we don't have to say such an Eitzah or such a Gzeira, a Kama, that it's, according to many Shitas, mutter. But Al Kapanim, it's important to keep this in mind. This is the Shita of the Mishnah Berurah. Now, another thing to think about here is I see that the Orcha Shabbos brings down from Rav Shmuel Orbach. It's an interesting chumrah. I see that the Orcha Shabbos brings down from Rav Shmuel Orbach quite an interesting chumrah. And I'm not sure what to do about this. Maybe the Olam will help me out over here. As you all know, I'm not Roy to argue on Gedolim. And but I have a question here. Let's see the question. He says that if you have the tea cents that you made, so he explains how do you make the tea cents? How do normal people make the tea cents? So they take the boiling hot water and they pour the boiling hot water onto the tea bag. You know, you take the boiling hot water, you pour it onto the tea bag. We explained many times that if you're going to do that, then we have no guarantee that it cooked the actual leaves, right? Because it hit first the bag, and we know that Iro is mevashel likadei klipa. So therefore, the assumption is that it hit first the bag, which is the outer layer, and it cooked the bag. We have no reason to believe that it cooked the leaves, and we certainly have no reason to believe that it cooked every part of the leaf, which is why, no harm done. Now I have my tea cents. I take my boiling hot water, I put it onto my leaf, and lemaisa, onto my bag. And now everyone knows what happens. The boiling hot water sits in the tea bag. It sits in the cup. And then some people take out the tea bag. And now you have the tea cents that was made. What's the status of this tea cents? Let's try to figure this out without Rishmul or Bachamam. Let's try to figure this out on our own a second. What's the status of this tea bag, of this tea cents that you just made? If I had to down, what is this tea cents? What would you say, Rabbi? I would say it got cooked. The tea got cooked for sure to the level of klisheni, right? Which is what Rabbi Danziger is saying, correct? He just spelled klisheni, but he means in Yiddish klisheni, right? So when you take a tea bag, the most we got here is that the tea taste was cooked to the extent of a klisheni. Right? Is that, Rabbi Silberman, you're masking to that? Masking to that. Now, Rabbi say, this is my urn, and I'm pouring now boiling hot water. So we always said you can't pour the boiling hot water into cold tea cents because that's the chumrah of the Mishnah Berurah, is that Iroi is mevashal, even a liquid, like we explained, even though it's, the Rashba is not like this, but the Mishnah Berurah holds not like that. You're being mevashal, the outside layer. You're being mevashal, the outside layer, I guess, of the liquid, we'll call it, okay? So when I take an urn and I take my cents, which was previously cooked, I'm pouring my urn straight onto it, that would be forbidden, and that's what we're not going to do. So what do? You take the boiling hot water from the urn, you pour it in. This is your kli sheni, and now you take the cents and you put it into the kli sheni, okay? Everybody said, does anybody have a problem with that? Does anybody have a problem with that? I have a problem with that. Shmuel Orbach seems to have a different problem, which is a little bit like that. Let's leave this problem on the side a second. I have a problem with that. We said once that when we cooked something on Erev Shabbos, you're allowed to take it now and shoyre it in a kli rishon. If you take chicken and you cook it on Erev Shabbos, cook, not bake. You cook it on Erev Shabbos, you cook it in a kli rishon. Excuse me, you cooked it on a pot, in a fire, mamish, cooked, whatever. Or we said k'neid lach, we said lakshin. And now you want to know, can I take the k'neid lach and the lakshin and put it in a kli rishon off the fire? So that's mefurish, it's mutter. Okay, with the droplets, you have to make sure there's no droplets or whatever. Maybe previously cooked liquid is not a problem. Okay, whatever. But the actual lakshin, dry lakshin that was cooked on Erev Shabbos. Can I take dry lakshin and put it into a kli rishon off the fire? It's mefurish, it's mutter. But if you remember, we said over at Mishnah Berurah that the Mishnah Berurah said, but let's say the only extent of how much you cooked it was you put it into a kli rishon off the fire on Erev Shabbos. Erev Shabbos, it was off the fire in a Kli Rishon. And you cooked it in that. Probably negaya noodles and things like that. You cooked it inside a Kli Rishon. And now afterward, you take it and you want to put it back in a Kli Rishon. So the Mishabura brought a big machlekes, if the other remembers. The Mishabura said to be machmer. Mishabura brought down a machlekes that he says maybe the first time it got cooked in the Kli Rishon, it got one level of cooking. And since it didn't cook on a fire, who says that when you put it back into the pot, which is a Kli Rishon, that it's not going to cook it more? This is what we saw, if you remember, from the Mishabura. And I read back then, I told the Oilam that there's a Tila LaDavid that says the same thing when it comes to a Kli Sheni. If you remember, we said Huadin, when it comes to a Kli Sheni, it's the same issue. So, L'chaira, Dainu, something that it's originally was only cooked in a Kli Sheni, we said that now when you want to cook it in a Kli Sheni, you have to worry that maybe the first time it got cooked to this extent in a Kli Sheni. And now the second time, the Kli Sheni is doing a stronger job. That was what the Tila David said. In other words, the Tila David said that the only time is if I take something that was cooked in a Kli Rishon, I can for sure put it in a Kli Sheni. Or if I take something that was cooked in the fire, I can for sure put it in a Kli Rishon. But if you have equal, you have something that was cooked in a Kli Rishon, you can't put it back in a Kli Rishon. If you have something that's cooked in a Kli Sheni, you can't put it in a Kli Sheni. This is what, now I did say back then, I wasn't sure about this, but Allah Maisa, if this is true, it'll come out a big chumrah. It'll come out that you won't be able, this will be a new reason why you should get the chumrah of Svia B'oichlin, and that you should pour the boiling hot water into your cup. Now this is a Kli Sheni, and then pour from there into the sense, into the tea sense, because the tea sense was only cooked to the extent of a Kli Sheni. And now when you'll be cooking it by pouring from the Kli Sheni, that'll be a Kli Shlishi, which for sure is butter. Plus you'll get the kula, you'll get the chumrah that you won't be over on Sfia B'oichlin, because now when you're pouring it into the tea sense, it's just diluting it like the Paiskim say, and it's not considered that you're coloring the water. So if you want to know, do you have to be machmir on this? What's the issue? The issue is that ham in the liquid is something that was never cooked. So I'm a little bit misupik how to be donning this, right? I'm not sure. How do you don tam in a liquid? Do you say tam in a liquid is something that just becomes this bottle to the liquid? Or you say, no, we know where the tam is coming from. The tam is coming from the tea. So if the tam is coming from the tea, and we know the tea is easily cooked, so I have to worry that tea cooks in a Kli Sheni, and therefore you should do this and make it in the Kli Shlishi, even though it was previously cooked in a Kli Sheni. But we said that maybe it only got this level cooked. I don't know. I have to sit and digest this, but I have to digest this. Rav Shmuel Oibach has a different chumrah there, which is maybe related to this, but upon him, it's the chayra. So I would have thought that maybe there is a makom taka to be machmer. All the years I say over that you could just take the tea sense and put it straight into the Kli Sheni. And now I'm a little bit noita that why not? Maybe you should get this chumrah and take the tea sense and put it into the third cup and pour from the second cup into the third cup. That's l'chayra. That's l'chayra. Now, I say, Adkan is a kaf aleph. And now let's go into a very geshmak inyan. A very geshmak inyan that that we spoke about already. And I think now you appreciate more. When I gave the shear back then about the droplets, I want to go over the sugya of droplets now, but from a different angle, because the oilam is much more educated. Now that Kimat, we've learned most of Hilchos Bishul, and now you should be able to appreciate a lot of the things we spoke about more. At the time, I was asked different questions. We spoke about all the different droplet shilas. Like, for example, do you have to wipe out the cup from droplets of cold water that was never cooked? You have to wipe out the cup from droplets of previously cooked liquid. You have a little bit of the droplets from your tea left, and you want to know, can I pour the boiling hot water straight into my teacup again? You have the droplets from the ladle that you want to know, can I put that ladle into the chicken soup pot? You want to know, et cetera, all the different scenarios that we had back then. I'll make a sikkum now, but I'm going to come from a different angle. Back then, I was, first of all, right away, is there a shaila? Is there a shaila at all? Your first reaction is, and this is what I saw. One sefer says that maybe there's bichlal no shaila, because over here you're dealing with, like we spoke about, a liquid which is being poured onto a liquid, right? So when you're dealing with a liquid that's poured onto a liquid, so then right away you now have to realize that it's not so pashit. Okay, Maisa, we're machmer on that shaila, but the Maisa, the Mishabur over here brings over here in Tzivkot and Ayin Ches, a very interesting bit of information over here. Mishabur and Tzivkot and Ayin Ches brings a Mogen Avram. He brings the Mogen Avram that says if you have boiling hot meat, and you take this boiling hot meat and you place it onto a, let's say, gravy or a chicken soup, which was a previously cooked liquid. Boiling hot meat onto, everyone has a case, boiling hot potato, putting onto a liquid that was even previously cooked. The Shabura brings over here an incredible chumrah. He said that's usher because why? Eino misarif and mevashel kedei klipa. Unbelievable chumrah. When the Shabura just said is if I take just think about what we're saying, Rabbi Isai. Bishul just said, if you take a boiling hot egg, some people, we spoke about this, no? They put eggs in the cholent. Who was the one that admitted it? No? Shimon, was it you? Who admitted this? My Fiskus doesn't do that. No. It's interesting how Rabbi Shlisselfeld doesn't look like a guy that has eggs in the cholent either. I was a little bit misupik about Singer. Okay, very good. I was misupik. And Silberman, I'm not going to start over there because I have my reasons. Al Kapanim, Ben Markstein Taka might put eggs in the cholent. That's quite a possibility. His father for sure might. I don't mean on Shabbos. I mean before Shabbos. So what does Rabbi Singer do on Shabbos? He takes out the egg. Now he has a problem because the egg is very hot, right? So what he really wants to do is just take it and put a stream of cold water under, on top of it, right? He wants to take the water and pour the water on top of the egg to cool off the egg. He does the egg is boiling, or he wants to take the egg and put it into cold water. Just put it straight into cold water. This Mogen Avram says mefurish that you're not allowed. The Mogen Avram says you're not allowed to take boiling hot meat, boiling hot egg, and put it into liquid that was even previously cooked. You can't take this boiling hot egg and put it into liquid which was not cooked, right? And that's a very, very important idea. That's a very important idea. Now, this I must tell you is a tema. It's a tema. The Prima Godim says it's a tema. The Beis Meir says it's a tema. The Mamish, all the Achrayim go on this Mishnah Brura, on this Mogen Avram, and they say they don't understand the Mogen Avram, and they have different questions. What's the Mogen Avram saying? The Mogen Avram saying that when I take a piece of meat and I put it onto a liquid, it'll mavashal the outermost klipa. So right away, Rabbi Isai, you can ask a kasha from, I'm sure that's what you're all thinking, from the Gemara in Yuma, that talks about the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur when he had to go into the mikvah. So they wanted to cool down the mikvah. So they used to take a metal boiling hot rod. They used to take a boiling hot metal rod and they used to throw it into the water to cool off, to heat up the water because it was cold. So you see mefurish that Avada, we're not worried about the outside layer of water, which is right around the piece of metal or right around the food or right around the egg. What's the reason why? Because it immediately gets misariv into the liquid and it gets this battle in its heat. The heat right away gets mixed together with all the liquid. And therefore, it doesn't have a chance to be mavashal kedei klipa. And this is an absolute pella. The Beis Meir says, "V'li nira t'zeinai." It's an irei. He doesn't understand it. He says it's an irei, first of all, that's nifsuk the kiluach. He doesn't understand anyways it's an irei that's not nifsuk the kiluach. And this is the Chayr Shver from Sifyat Beis, the Prima Godim asks. This is a very big kasha. It's a very, very big kasha. Right? The Chayr, you see clear that the klipa gets mixed immediately, which is really what you're seeing somewhat in Sifyat Beis. And it is a shtickle pella. That it seems to be that I should be allowed to take an egg and put it into cold water because the liquid around it won't be mivashal. The Mogen Avram is saying the liquid right around the edge of the egg is going to be nisbashal. That klip is worse, which is a pella, because immediately that water gets mixed together with the rest of the water. And l'chayra, it shouldn't have the ability to be mivashal. L'chayra. Now, l'maisa, even if we argue on the Mogen Avram's case, right? Even if we'll argue, the Mishabura goes to the Mogen Avram. So that's Psak Halacha. Kaneri, you have to say that it's a little bit of liquid, whatever you have to say something over here. But one thing is clear, Rabbi Isai, even the Achrayim that argue on the Mogen Avram, they agree that it's only because the water or the liquid immediately gets displaced and immediately gets mixed. But let's say you would have a tiny amount of liquid. You would have like a droplet of liquid or something like that. For example, you want to take a boiling hot pot and put it down onto the countertop. And on the countertop, there's a little bit of liquid there, cooked, not cooked, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. That's a vada according to everyone that will be mavashal. Of course, that'll be mavashal. The only time they argued on the Magen Avraham is when the liquid is getting mixed with other liquids. But machenken, when I'm taking the pot and I'm putting it down onto a liquid and it's not getting mixed the liquid, then avada is going to be mavashal kedei klipa. So therefore, the shaila that we're going to deal with, can I take boiling hot water and pour it straight into a cup that has a droplet? You can't say mixed over here, by say it hits down on that droplet and it just gets mixed with the hot water. So that for sure should be an issue. That for sure should be an issue. And this is, no, Rabbi Lieberman, there's nothing to do with nifsak hakiluach, because I'm talking about a pot, which itself is a kli rishon. I'm talking about the boiling hot water, which is coming straight from the urn. So it's not nifsak hakiluach. It's not nifsak hakiluach. I'm just trying to show that the first thing you have to realize is that even though there's a Magen Avraham that the Achronim argue on, and the Mishnah Berurah brings, that when you're taking boiling hot, the Mishnah Berurah is a lot of chedushim here, Rabbi Yisai. First of all, ein bishul acha bishul b'davar lach, maybe min haTorah. Second of all, maybe davar gush, the whole thing is a psachumra, whatnot, and it's nifsak hakiluach. Okay, alpha p came for whatever reason the Mishnah Berurah is machmir. But the biggest chiddush is the Mishnah Berurah is being machmir. When I take a boiling hot egg and I put it onto a liquid, why don't we say that right away all that water gets nis'ariv? Right? That's what we would have said, Rabbi Michaeli. That's what we would have said. But the Mishnah Berurah says not like that. But one thing we'll all agree to is that if it's not getting mixed, the liquid, and that the water is a tiny drop of water, like the water on a countertop, that's for sure usher, and everyone agrees to that. You 100% cannot take a boiling hot pot and put it down onto a water on the countertop because there's no water it's going to get mixed with. So what are you doing? You're cooking the water. So too, if you take a boiling hot water from your urn and you knock that water straight onto a droplet on the cup, l'chayra, there's at least a shaila. That's where the shaila begins. L'chayra, that's where the shaila begins. So therefore, we have to be machmir. And you're not going to be allowed to take boiling. I just want you to come from the starting point. The starting point of this shaila is that it's more usher sounding than mutter sounding. Now we have to find out, is there ever a kula? So everybody say, someone asked me why when I said the shir, I didn't say over Rav Avadia. Rav Avadia and Yabia Oimer and Dalad Lamed Gimel, he's got the big kula on this sugya. And his kula was mamish in every single case. Remember, we spoke about 9-10 cases: cooked droplets, uncooked droplets, droplets in a cup, droplets on the lid, droplets in a ladle. He said, you go and look at Rav Avadia. Rav Avadia's makel in every single case. So, Maisa, I'm going to tell you that this Rav Avadia is such a big chiddush. Such a big chiddush. And again, I want to start out like this. We're starting out that according to Mishnah Berurah, for sure these things are a problem. The Mishnah Berurah was talking about not a droplet. He was talking about cooked liquid, not cooked droplets. He's talking about mamish, a puddle of cooked liquid, Rabbi said. Just think about what we're talking about. He's talking about cooked liquid that gets misariv, that we don't even understand the Mishnah Berurah. Just shtalzach for. And if you take a boiling hot egg or a boiling hot piece of meat and put it onto that chicken soup, the Mishnah Berurah says that's usher. Okay? So before you begin, there's kimat the mefurish the Mishnah Berurah that says that whatever we're going to talk about today is usher. So let's start like that. The Mishnah Berurah told us that when you take a piece of boiling hot meat and you put it onto the remnants of chicken soup, that there's enough in there to make a puddle. Then that still is usher, says the Mishnah Berurah. And it's previously cooked. So when we're dealing with boiling hot water coming onto a droplet, where you don't even have the svara that the Achronim argued on the Magen Avraham, just realize you're arguing straight on the Mishnah Berurah, and you're arguing on all of the Achronim that the Mishnah Berurah was chaylik on the chumrah. Is that crystal clear before I start? I want this to be clear that what's our starting point? Our starting point is that the shaila we're talking about the Mishnah Berurah forbids, and much more aggressively. Mishnah Berurah forbids it, even if you'd have a whole puddle of liquid, Rabbi Yisai. That's number one. So now what does Rav Avadia say? So Rav Avadia was a very, very great goyin. He was a great goyin. But he says such big chidushim. He says such the biggest chidushim. It's maybe the biggest chiddush that I ever saw, ever. Rav Avadia writes like this. He says, there's no shaila. It's a psikresha, it's leinichale, and it's two sveikis. Psikresha, leinichale, and two sveikis. Okay, what does he say? Okay, it's a psikresha, leinichale, we all agree. A little droplet of water, bain if it's cooked, bain if it's not cooked on a cup, is certainly he doesn't care about that droplet of water. And that's not what he's coming to do. He's not coming to cook that droplet of water. So therefore, it's a psikresha, leinichale, maybe. But that's what he says. Now, what are the two sveikis? So he says, first of all, maybe Iroi isn't mevashal. The the Shulchan Aruch and everybody says Ira is mevashel. So he says, yeah, but it's at least a suffix because the Rashbam says that Ira is not mevashel. Ira is like the din of a klisheni, and Ira is not mevashel. That's suffix number one. I, the Shulchan Aruch, not like that, fine, but midis feka nafka. So now it's a psik reish the loy nichalei. And maybe the Ira doesn't even mevashel in the first place. We keep talking about Ira being mevashel. Maybe Ira is not mevashel. Second of all, he says, and what are you talking about over here? A chatzi shir? A chatzi shir? So he says, so you should know, chatzi shir is a big machlekes if chatzi shir is deraisa or derabanan. And with his great bekias, he brings down many shitas that taka. First of all, he brings down many shitas that agree even with the Rashbam. He says the Rashbam is not by himself. He brings down certain shitas that most of the olam never heard of. And then, and he also brings down Chati Shir, many shitas that hold that Chati Shir is an Issa D'Rabbanan and not an Issa D'Oraisa. So therefore he goes on and he says, that's his tshuva. That's his tshuva, Rabbi said. Somebody was asking, why did I have to come onto Rav Moshe? And Rav Moshe was only mako by the case of previously cooked liquids. Just look in Rav Avaja. Now, right, where's Rabbi Elbaz? Rabbi Elbaz ran away because he knows that we might come to maybe to say a different side. Yeah. But Torah v'lilmod anu tzrichim. No, Morty, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? I have no choice. There's no brayer. It's this Rav Avaja is tamua. It's very big chiddush. Very big chiddush. Very big chiddush. First of all, that which he says that it's a suffix, if Ira is mevashel or not, is absolutely tamua me'oid me'oid. The Prima Godim in Yeridea, in Siman Samaches, says over there, he has a few places the Prima Godim says this, but over there is the most explicit. In Yeridea, the Prima Godim is talking about a case of where a piece of, a milk, a stream of milk, boiling hot milk, possibly touched a piece of meat. And he dons over there, are we going to be makel on that piece of meat? He says, maybe it's a sveika. Suffix number one is maybe the stream of milk never got to the meat. We weren't sure. Suffix number two is that maybe Ira is not mevashel. Right? Maybe Ira is not mevashel. That's what he discusses over there. And it has to do with Basa B'chalav needs Bishul, not just Plia and whatever. So he says over there, he says, Klape, the second suffix, is Ira not mevashel. He said, that's not even a suffix. That's not even a suffix. We paskin b'vadai that Ira is mevashel k'tei klipa b'vadai. The Rashbam doesn't exist by us. Who agrees to this? Who concurs with this? The Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah tells us that Ira is mevashel k'tei klipa b'vadai, so much so that in an emphatic statement, Rabbi Feldstein, the Mishnah Berurah actually says that if you poured boiling hot water on tavlinim, we aser it b'diavad. This Mishnah Berurah is so aggressive, it means he doesn't even consider the Rashbam enough of a shita to be meko b'diavad. Hagam, that when we're talking about a knas, we're not dealing with a shayla of a deraisa, we're dealing with a shayla of a derabanan. The knas to aser is a shayla derabanan. So why did the Mishnah Berurah say that we're going to aser the tavlinim if you pour the boiling hot water onto the tavlinim from a klirishin? Is because he paskins bivadai that the Rashbam does not exist in halacha. It's not even a suffix. Right? And that's l'chayra pashit b'tachas the pashit that Ira never ever you should think that Rabbi Isaac. Ira is mevashel klipa bevadai, and it's not even a suffix, and it's a vadai yisid rabbanan b'di'eved if you did it, and we answer it with a knas. That's number one. Is that clear, DJ? All right, it's clear. Number two is Rabbi Isaac chazi shir. Rabbi Isaac the Mishnah Berurah paskins emphatically borrow in our siman. In the first siva over here in Shin Yud Ches, he says Chati Shir Asim in a Torah, and the Mishnah Berurah again in Siman Shin Mem Chati Shir Asim in a Torah, and it's not even a suffix. And the Mishnah Berurah klur in many places, all over the place. The Mishnah Berurah paskins klur, it's not a suffix. We paskin Chati Shir by Hilchos Shabbos is an Issa Deraisa Bivadai, and therefore, if this is the reason to be mekel, Chalila, this is not a reason to be mekel. So now we got to go weiter. So there, we spoke then, we spoke about the chayra. Oh, actually, so someone else asked me, it's a very, very fine yid. He called me up and he told me that there's a shmua from Reb Shlomo Zalman. What was the shmua from Reb Shlomo Zalman? And the truth is, there are others that try this also. That they want to say, the truth is, Reb Shlomo Zalman himself, Grada, not so clear. It seems to be Reb Shlomo Zalman himself, when it came to wiping out lids and whatnot and all these things, excuse me, Shlomo Zalman, he wasn't so anti the chumrah. He was machmir in many places. The Shulchan Shlomo brings down He says that maybe you don't have to be machmir, but in the Mora Shabbos he brings down, he says maybe you should be machmir, and then they bring down that different stories about Rosh Hashanah that he was machmir. So what he actually did is not so known and not so clear, but it's clear that there was some chumrah Rosh Hashanah agreed over here. But they say a shmua from Rosh Hashanah that he said over from a Mishnah in Trumas in Perikid Aleph in Halacha Zayin. Over there in the Mishnah in Trumas, he says, the Mishnah says that let's say you have a barrel of oil from Truma. And now you pour out that barrel and you're left with droplets. So the Mishnah says over there, I actually have the Yerushalmi right here. I was just learning it on Ben Azmanim. But the Yerushalmi, it's somewhere over there. But the Yerushalmi basically says, it's really a Mishnah. He basically says you take the barrel, you give it a couple of shakes, you knock it out, and now you're left with little droplets of truma oil on the side of your barrel, but most of it are gone. And now you can pour inside chulin oil. And the rest of the droplets that'll be inside will be nisbatel in those droplets of truma will be nisbatel in the chulin oil. Okay, so what do you see? Says Rosh Hashanah, apparently, allegedly, says the guy Rosh Hashanah that if you have droplets of truma and you take the barrel of truma and you pour out the droplets, so then now I can go and put inside of it chulin. So what do you see? You see that when you have droplets on the side of a barrel, and you can do this even lichatchila, you see droplets on the side of the barrel are unimportant and they're not chashiv, and therefore it's mamish nisbatel. That little droplets are called batel, and they don't exist. And since they don't exist, therefore it's not a problem when it comes to chulin. And huadin, it's not a problem when it comes to our cup. That if you have little droplets on the bottom of the cup and you just shook it out, even though there might be one or two droplets back on the cup, but that's not considered that you're mavashlet because those droplets are batel. That's what they say, a shmua from Rosh Hashanah. They say, manoimar, manedaber. I need in my smallness, in my littleness. I don't understand this. I hope and that it was only just a shmua, but it's such a shver thing. It's so difficult to understand this. A place over there is discussing a shaila of ein mevatlin iser lechatchila. Over there, we're discussing that are you allowed to pour in chulin oil because there's going to be little droplets of truma that are going to be nisbatel into the chulin oil. So the halach is you're not allowed to be mevatel in iser lechatchila. However, when you have the shaila, that whole iser of ein mevatel in iser lechatchila is only an iser drabanan, and therefore b'makim tircha, Chazal said such a tircha, you go in there and you're going to go and wipe out the truma oil and everything. It's such a tircha and etc. So b'kai gavna, Chazal said they didn't make the iser of ein mevatel in iser lechatchila. Okay. But over here, we're dealing with cooking droplets. Bain if it's the rice shaila, bain if it's the rabbanan shaila, but we're dealing with cooking. Are you cooking or not? What does that have to do with ein mevatlin that they weren't matriach you to go and clean it out? They didn't look at it as a bitula isser. There, the lumda says that they said it's not called you're being mevatel in isser. You're not doing it bedafka to be mevatel in isser. You just want to pour your oil in there. It's going to be mevatel memela, so that's allowed. But mashenkin over here, you're cooking the droplets. The fact that you're not doing it, so that's psikration, as far as, but that has nothing to do, and therefore that will not help us, Rabbi Isai. That's another difficult svara. So therefore, we needed to come on to our Rebbe, Moshe Feinstein Zayichet Tzadik Livracha, that the Rebbe told us in the 93rd Shuva that he had a whole different approach to this. The Rebbe of Moshe told us that when you're dealing with droplets that are not previously cooked, that are uncooked, he says you got to be machmir. I have a svara, it's a psik reisha, and it's a chati shir, and the only time we answer chati shir is because of achshevei. So there's no achshevei, it's a psik reisha. But Rav Moshe says who could be makel on svaras like that when you're dealing with Hilchos Shabbos? But said Rav Moshe, but when you have droplets that are non-cooked cooked droplets, a previously cooked droplet, so there we have it's a psik reisha to leinichale, and there's no achshevei because it's a chati shir. Not that we're saying Chati Shir is only the Rabbanan. No, about a Chati Shir is the Raisa. But we don't say Achshevei on a Chati Shir when you're not Kavana for that, mixed with the fact that Rav Moshe says, I hold that droplets that are previously cooked, there's no Isser Bishul Min HaTorah, and that the whole thing is only Nisad Rabbanan, Shitas Rav Moshe, Shita the Chazaynish. So therefore, they didn't make this chumrah on previously cooked droplets b'kai govna. But if you have droplets that were not cooked, then you're machmir. Now, do you want to know now why Mishnah Berurah is arguing on Rav Moshe? Now you see what the machlekes is. The Mishnah Berurah holds that even previously cooked droplets have a din of, there's no difference in the world of Mishnah Berurah. If they're cold droplets, game over. Doesn't matter if they were cooked or uncooked. It has a din of bishul. Yesh bishul acha bishul b'davar lach, game over. Look, gamre. Rav Moshe argued on that nakuda. Halacha l'maisa. I think we said last time that the halacha l'maisa is basically, I'll go through a sikum of these shilas now, but the halacha l'maisa is that, is it a crazy chumrah to dry out a cup with previously cooked liquids? It's not a crazy chumrah. It's not a crazy chumrah. Is it a chumrah when the droplets are non-cooked? That's mikra din. That you better do. That even Rav Moshe was machmir. Now, if I had to go through the cases one by one based on the information that you know, let's go one by one. We did this then, but now you'll appreciate it more. If you have a ladle, and you're taking the ladle, you washed off the ladle. It's a very common case. You found a little bit of schmutz on the ladle. You quickly take it, you put it under the sink, right? And then you take that ladle and you put her straight into the kli rishon. That's uncooked droplets, and you're putting into a kli rishon that you absolutely should be machmir on. You absolutely should be machmir. And certainly not to be saimech on Rav Avadja, which is very, very kasha and difficult. That's case number one. Case number two is you have a ladle, and the ladle has droplets that were previously cooked. It's a very common case. You scooped out the chicken soup, and now afterward, you left the ladle on the side. So now the droplets of previously cooked chicken soup droplets are still there. And now you want to go, let's say it got cooled down. You're up to the second portion, whatever. And now you want to go and take the ladle and put it back into the kli rishon, the pot of the kli rishon. So this is a case that Reb Moshe Feinstein Zeichet Tzadik Levracha would be makel on. And this is a case that our Rebbe, the Mishnah Berurah, would be machmir on. So what's the eitzah in this case? In every case, I'll give you an eitzah. So just leave the ladle inside the bowl, the pot. If you're anyways not Hungarian enough that you actually brought a pot to the table, Rabbi Isai, which in my family's grounds for divorce, okay? But if you actually did that, so then you also can also leave the ladle inside the pot. If you leave the ladle inside the pot, you're not going to have any such issues. The next case that comes up is the pot cover that you took off on Friday night to take your children. Those droplets get cooled down right away. Now here it's pretty serious, Rabbi Isai, because those droplets are uncooked, are cooked droplets, but they're going to get cooked again on the fire. They're going mama straight on the fire. You're going to put the lid back on. Okay. So according to Rav Moshe, it's mutter. And if anybody wants to do it, we can't stop him, right? However, it is quite scary. It is quite scary cooking ala eish. You don't even have svaras. There are shitas out there that hold that kli rishon loy ala eish is maybe drabanan. We don't paskin like that, but there are shitas like that. Here you don't even have those shitas. So I would certainly tell a person that it is a mila to take that lid, which is what I do whenever I need to, and I leave it on the hot plate. I leave it on an area. I leave it usually sometime when I have a crack pot. I leave it on the crack pot, and then they stay warm. If they stay warm, there's nothing to worry about. That's the eitzah. Again, in each case, you have an eitzah. To take boiling hot water and take from the sink, let's say Rabbi Moyle, you go to shul on Shabbos and you want to have a cup. So you take those glass cups that are the communal property of every single person. And you want to wash it out with cold water from the sink. So then that's for sure a major problem. Number one is, I don't think hygienically you did anything by putting in cold water. So that's number one. Number two is you're going to pour the boiling hot water straight onto those droplets. That's checkmate, says Reb Moshe. That's Asr Gomer, according to Reb Moshe. I wouldn't do that. So what you could do is, great, take that cup, go to the urn when it's dry, take the cup, pour the boiling hot water, splash it into the sink, right? Pour that water into the sink. And now the droplets that are at the bottom are warm still. And then quickly go and pour the next cup of boiling hot water onto those droplets. That's no problem. If the droplets are previously cooked, like from your tea, so this is the case that the great Goyin Rav Moshe was taka makelin, and anybody who wants to do like Rav Moshe, for sure, there is a makom to be saimich on Rav Moshe, and I'll even add here that there's a few svaras why you might want to be makel like Rav Moshe. First of all, everybody say you have Rav Moshe svaras, chati shir, achshavei, on a previously cooked liquid. You have Rav Moshe. Number two is you probably have the Rashba, the Ran, and the Taz. Unlike the cases we spoke about till now, this is Iroi Klirishin. Iroi Klirishin that you're pouring where? Rabbi Yisai, you're taking Iroi Klirishin onto a liquid. When you take Iroi Klirishin onto a liquid, do we have the Rashba here? Yesh Ladin. Maybe you only have the Rashba when there's enough of a liquid that it gets mixed into that liquid. Maybe when there's enough of a liquid where it got mixed into that. Or maybe no. Maybe the Rashba will say, I'm always Mako, because we know there's a concept of Tata Gover. Tata Gover means the one on the bottom, his coldness is Gover. So this is not so simple to me, but I would say that if you have a little drop, you have, it's interesting. It's one of these things, it's hard to know what to do. If you have this amount of liquid, a small amount of liquid, you might have lost Rav Moshe. Because Rav Moshe told us it's Chatzi Shir, it's Pigresha Delei Nichale on a Chatzi Shir. You might not have Chatzi Shir anymore. So the you should be Machmer. And that is the halacha. You have to be Machmer in that case. If you have a little bit of tea left, you have to be Machmer, not pour the boiling hot water. If you only have droplets, it could be we lost the tzirif of the Rashba. And all you're left with is Rav Moshe. If a person wants to know, can he be Mako like Rav Moshe? What can I say? Of course he could be Mako like Rav Moshe. Do you want to know, is it a crazy chumrah to wipe out? Right? Yes, so Rabbi Ratchkin just asked me that according to the Rashba it mixes, but maybe the Rashba only mixes, Rabbi Ratchkin, in a case of where there's not a drop, is what to mix. But not in a case where it's only a drop. When it's only a drop, it got knocked, like we explained from the Mogen Avram. That even the Achrayim that argue in the Mogen Avram, they'll agree with the Mogen Avram when the Mogen Avram is taking a pot and putting it onto a counter with one or two droplets, because there it doesn't mix with anything. So if a person wants to know, can he be Mako like Rav Moshe and just to, shake it out and he's left with droplets? Rav Moshe is Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe can be Seimichan b'shas atchak or loy b'shas atchak. But if you want to know, is there a chumrah? Is it like some crazy chumrah that a person's doing? I don't know if it's a crazy chumrah. If he wants to if he wants to clean out the droplets, he doesn't maybe have to make sure it's dry like the Rebbe. In his stomach, he does have to dry it out. The chumrah is Hashem chumrah. The reason why maybe there's more of a market to be makel here is because there's an Aruch HaShulchan in Sif Nun Beis that I didn't mention to you. And so maybe there's a little bit more here. There's an Aruch HaShulchan in Sif Nun Beis. He says like this. It's quite an arichas. I won't be ma'irich here, but he says, B'kli rishin l'shtia mutar laros mimenu l'toich tzainanim. He's talking about the Rashba. Pouring boiling hot water onto cold water. He says, afilu if the tzainin is muat, and even if it's a little bit. Because all it said in the Gemara was asalaris tzainin l'toichai. All it says in the Gemara is you can't take cold water and put it into hot water. So he says, va'ani mili ma'at tzainin. Aval harbe mutar. Listen to the Aruch HaShulchan. Shma mino. Kisheiter mimenu lit tzainin. When it said in the Shulchan Aruch that it was mutar to pour boiling hot water into cold, afilu ma'at tzainin mutar. He's coming to argue on the Mishnah Berurah right now. Okay. The taimai, what's the reason of the Rashba? The afagav that the tzainin is mu'et, it's a little bit, but tata gavar. We say there's a concept of tatoi gavar. Tatoi gavar means the one that's on the bottom wins. So if the hot is top and the bottom is cold, she wins. The cold one wins. The cold you know what happens as you're pouring in the boiling hot water into the cold? When you take the urn and you pour the boiling hot water onto the fellow underneath, it cools it down. Listen what he says. When you have a hot tea on Shabbos from a Kli Rishon, and you have the tea sense on the bottom, and you pour inside nice and ma'at sense, you put in the cup a little bit of sense, and shoifchim aleim give Kli Rishon, you pour the urn water onto the sense, shaper avdi. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to take the boiling hot water and put it onto the sense. And you don't have to do it the other way around. You don't have to, right? He writes, he then writes, what did they do in the Vardik? You hear this, Rabbi say? Unbelievable. Oh, you didn't know this, Rabbi Schlisselfeld. You knew that in the Vardik, they used to pour urn water straight into a tea sense? Rabbi Danziger. There are no games, Rabbi Fiskus. Well, if he's the very the Shabbos is desire, the Billy Tain Chamin, Mikli Rishon, I'll send sign, Mil Ladina, Im Neisten, if you do it, Leislenba. If you do it, it's fine. Because the Torah, the Ran, the Zacham Matir, Yesh Lismach on the Rambam, the Rashba, the Ramach, Ein Bishul Bishul Fibda. So the Aruch HaShulchan, is the Aruch HaShulchan going to help us on droplets, Rabbi Ratchkin? I saw one sefer that says the Aruch HaShulchan is going to be makel like Rav Moshe. Okay? Rabbi said it's no shayches. It's ironic, but it's no shayches. It's mamish no shayches l'chayra. The Aruch HaShulchan is being makel on that which the Mishnah Berurah says first you have to be machmer. And Rav Moshe would agree on that. Because we are machmir that if you pour in boiling hot water into a cold liquid and the resultant mixture is more than yatzaledis by, the Mishnah Berurah's psak is to be machmir. Of course, but the evidence okay. And even Rav Moshe was machmir on that. The only thing Rav Moshe was makel on was for a whole different reason. He was makel because it was a tiny droplet. But if it's a tiny droplet, you don't have the Aruch HaShulchan, Rabbi Yisai. I don't believe that a tiny droplet is going to cool down all that boiling hot water. I don't know, Rabbi Yisai. So alacha lemaisa on the T-sense for machmir, because that's what everybody's machmir on. On the droplet, you should probably be machmir, and you can't hide behind the Aruch HaShulchan. If you want to know, do you have Rav Moshe? Of course you have Rav Moshe. L'chayr. That's l'chayr. L'gabe, the last two cases over here, with this I'll be Messiah. If you have a bowl, you have a chicken soup bowl, and you know, this happened last Friday night. The bowl had a little bit schmutz from the dishwasher. It didn't clean off properly. I don't mean my wife. I mean, we have a real dishwasher here. It didn't clean it off properly. So we took it and just put it under the water, under the sink. So I said, wait, now I got to be careful. What are you going to do? Now you have uncooked droplets. So now, if you were pouring straight from the Kli Rishon into the bowl, which most people don't do, so then that already, what? That would be a problem because you're doing Eroy straight onto uncooked droplets. What do most people do? They take a ladle. So now we get into the ladle, Shiloh. Can I take from a ladle out of the Kli Rishon? So what's the ladle now? The ladle inside, it's a Kli Rishon. Now the ladle is a Safek Kli Sheni. Safek Kli Sheni, Safek Kli Rishon. Safek Kli Sheni, Safek Kli Rishon, and you're pouring it onto uncooked droplets of water. I would think it should be machmer. I would think maybe it'd be machmer. I could hear it. I don't think it's such a crazy chumrah. I don't know. I can hear someone being makel. Certainly Rav Avad's makel, right? Because it's just a couple of droplets. But I can hear it being usher. The Mishnah Berurah brings down a chumrah of a ladle. Okay, you put it in there. Now might have a din of a Kli Rishon. Irui Kli Rishon onto a droplet of uncooked water is a problem. Right? Now, do you want to know for shteitzach if you have a ladle? You want to know you want to take a second serving of soup. So you have droplets of soup. So for shteitzach, that's no shayla in the world. Those droplets of soup, you can for sure take a ladle and take out of the ladle and now put it onto the droplets of soup. How do I know that? Because that's a mefurish in Mishnah Berurah in Reish and Gimel and Sipei Dalet. That's mefurish because now you have a sveika. You have number one, maybe a ladle as a din of a Kli Sheni anyways. Number two, an undropped liquid, maybe. No, we have lots of svaras over here to be makel on a droplet of a liquid. That's there's a lot to be saimich on over here. So if I could take the ladle and I could give it maybe a status of a Kli Sheni, okay? And if it's a Kli Sheni, it means it's an Iroi from a Kli Sheni. And even in the worst case scenario, what is she? She's a Kli Rishon. In the worst case scenario, it's an Iroi from a Kli Rishon. No, Iroi and a Kli Rishon on droplets, that is certainly a makom to be makel on. So again, if you have droplets of cooked liquid inside your bowl, you have droplets of cooked liquid that are inside your bowl and they got cooled down, and you want to take from a ladle, that the Mishnah Berurah first in Reish and Gimel is if cut and pay dalet is, because first of all, there's a man damer ein bishul achar bishul b'davar lach. Second of all, we have a tzad that a ladle has a din of a Kli Sheni. So there will be makel on that case. I think we got every case. Did we get every case, everybody say? Is there any case I didn't get? What do you guys say? Any case? So Be'ezus Hashem, B'schus, this wonderful, no, the lid we spoke about, right? The pouring into a sink. What's the case of pouring into the sink? Rabbi Lieberman. What's the case? I'm not sure what his face is. Akapanim. You have to dry the sink. That's interesting. You want to pour boiling hot water straight from a Kli Rishon, because if it's not a Kli Rishon, there's nothing to discuss. It's a Kli Sheni already. And then it would be mutter. What's the case where you're pouring straight from a Kli Rishon into the sink? What's a good case? I'm pouring from a Kli Rishon. Yeah, but what's the case? What case? Is there any normal person that's ever going to be pouring from a Kli Rishon on Shabbos into a sink? All right. Some have an urn over a sink. No. What would be a case? I can't even think of a case. Kashering on Shabbos, Rabbi Bolzim should be arrested. We have a case. What's the case? If there's a case, I'll don it. Soup down the drain. Soup down the drain. That what? It was spoiled. It was spoiled and it was boiling. Okay, that's not a bad case. It was boiling hot soup, and now you took it, and now you're pouring it onto the water, so there's droplets. I'd be scared. I'd be scared. It's not such a normal case, but I'd be scared. I'd be scared. Anybody's not scared? Why not? It's boiling hot water straight onto uncooked droplets. I'd be scared. Right? I'd be scared. So b'schos, all this, Rabbi say, Danny Katzman's baby should have the bris before Shkia. Bezos Hashem, Yisbarach, Siman Tov, Mazel Tov, Yeilanu, Kol Yisrael. Amen. Danny?
Amen. Amen, Rabbi.
Danny, unmute my brothers that we could sing Siman Tov and Mazel Tov, I think. No? I think so. What do you think?
People can unmute themselves.
Okay, everybody should unmute themselves. Siman Tov, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov, Siman Tov, Yeilanu, Kol Yisrael. I Siman Tov, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov, Siman Tov. I Siman Tov. Feldstein, hands on the wheel. Mazel Tov. Hands on the wheel.